The elk came in 2012 for the first time. We settled here and began the ranch in the early 40s, and there's never been an elk herd here until the fall of 2012. Yeah, and the elk were introduced into this valley. They were brought into the hills here to the north of us, the Nooksack herd. There's also been a lot of elk up in the hills to us to the south. None of those elk are in those mountains anymore. They've all been coming down into the valley. They've also introduced more elk into the valley, and they've dropped them off in the lower valley, and that poses a problem with them staying here. So this is our herd of just over 220 head of cattle. Beyond them, obviously, is the hills and the mountains where the elk should be. There's several places where they have grass areas in the lower mountains. The problem with it is the younger elk have been born here. They do not know that they need to go to the mountains. They are rough on the fences, first of all. Second of all, they're eating grass that we don't have allotted for them. We have the ranch set up to handle our 100 pair of cattle, but not another 30, 40, 50, 60 head of elk. They also overgraze the pastures, and our problem now is after they've been here several years, the pastures have been overgrazed and they don't come back as much. And so every year we have a little less pasture coming back. So we're having to supplement the cows with hay during the summer months now. It makes it really hard for us to keep farming. We've had the family farm since the early 40s. And with the elk taking a certain amount of our income every year, it makes it impossible to keep farming. There's so many repairs. We constantly have to buy hay to replace the hay that we've either made or the grazing that we've lost.
What I'm dealing with is a lot of elk devastation from our farmers and poor management by the Fish and Wildlife Commission with their co-management of the tribes. We have many farms that were self-sustaining before with their cattle operation and their dairy operations, and now the elk are knocking down their fences and eating so much of their hay. Many of them are spending at least $15,000 to $20,000 extra just to compensate for the feed that has been taking out.
This year, we start to see that the elk start to eat the fruit. So we went to the field and we checked that the elk ate around 8 acres with the first field, and after that they ate around 15 acres more. So we expect to get 6,000 pounds per acre. So we lost probably 20,000 pounds here in this area. That we lost around $100,000. The farm lost. Wow. And this year also they start to eat the sprout. And the next year we won't get any crop here. Wow. And they ate around 25 acres there in the other field, fruit.
So I'm Ron Weeson, one of the Skagit County Commissioners, and we've sent 2 or 3 different letters to the Fish and Wildlife Commission expressing our concern about the amount of elk on our valley floor here, the damage it's doing to the farmers and their crops and even the homes and their gardens and so forth. So it's just not realistic to have these homeowners responsible to feed this large animals for extended period of time. I think it's Fish and Wildlife's job to manage the herd, and they should be up in the hills. They shouldn't be down here on private property. So we would like the Fish and Wildlife to come in and make some improvements so we can make sure the private property rights and the farm crops can be harvested as they intend to do.
I mean, we've used hazing. That doesn't work. They actually will turn on my dog and myself and come after us. So the hazing just runs them around, and they just kind of end up eventually just laughing at us, in my opinion.
Randy Good. I live along State Route 20 and just by Hamilton, Washington. We started in 1974. I actually grew up on a dairy farm all my life, and then went to college, and then after college my wife and I purchased the property that we are at right now. About 8 years ago, elk started coming onto our pasture there, and so we ended up actually having to sell a bunch of beef cows because the elk would actually come down onto our our from the hills down onto our farmland, breaking down fences. So we couldn't face the liability of the elk getting out onto Highway 20. So we ended up having to sell the cows. And so counting this past year's crop, we're looking at 2,600 elk now. There's approximately 750 to 800 of these elk that are actually, calling our Ag Valley floor their home. But yet they were imported. They aren't natural. That proviso actually, with money to make it happen, requires Department of Fish and Wildlife to move the elk off the ag floor up onto state and federal lands and to keep them there. And so, like I mentioned, the funding is there to do that. So Department of Fish and Wildlife, that's one of their responsibilities to do.
The Fish and Wildlife Commission used to have it where it was the general season and most of the landowners were able to keep most of the elk out of here. But now with the closures of a lot of the hunting and only special permits, the elk herd on the valley floor is just growing astronomically. So what we'd like to do is see better management by the department and less pressure on the farms and the elk staying up on the forested uplands.